Hello, everyone. We're the co-hosts of the 2khmericansisters podcast, and I'm Mellissa.
And I'm Jasmine, and we are excited to be a part of BaylenFM's digital festival, House Arrest. And this is episode 3, so welcome back. This is a part of their mini-series interviews with amazing diverse leaders.
I just want to say we're honored to be a part of this really cool digital experience. Today, we'll be talking about what it's like growing up in the Asian diaspora, our experiences with racism, what our identities mean to us, and lastly, our advice to the API communities that we can share with those around the world.
So I'll go ahead and start it off. The first question is, what was it like growing up in the Asian diaspora? And Melissa will go first.
Sure. I'll go first with this question. So I remembered that when I was young, when I started kindergarten, I remember thinking that all Asians spoke my native tongue, which is Khmer. And I grew up in an apartment area where there was a lot of immigrants, mostly Cambodian immigrants. And so I went to elementary school where it was extremely diverse. So I saw a lot of people of color. They were my peers, and I didn't really notice race as an issue until our family moved to a predominantly white community. And I remember just feeling out of place because I went to a new school and I felt like my peers, like they were able to learn much quicker um, than myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I just remember not feeling smart enough, and I always felt behind. And so, you know, throughout high school, I always naturally gravitated toward people of color, people who look and sound like me. And I feel like I've always had more friends who have similar backgrounds and upbringing as me, as compared to my white peers who I felt like I couldn't really connect with them um, because they didn't really understand me. Um, and I had a hard time understanding, how they grew up as well. And so growing up in the Asian diaspora, I know that many of us can relate, to some of these challenges and issues of our cultural differences. And, when I think about some really specific examples of this, it could be our cultural differences, like Asian food. We tend to use more aromatic spices, and our dishes are, pretty powerful in flavor as compared to American food. And I remembered not wanting to bring my smelly lunch to school because I would
Same
get
with
made
me.
fun of,
Yeah.
or people would just say, yeah, you know how kids are, they're like,
Yeah.
ew,
They just say
that looks
things
gross.
as is. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it makes you feel embarrassed and ashamed. And
Mm.
that's just one example that I can think of. Another one is in Asian households, we typically take off our shoes before entering the house. And in the American household, in white culture, they tend to wear shoes inside the house, right? And so I remembered making friends, you know, with, with white friends, and they would think it's so odd to
Yeah.
take off all our shoes, at the front of the door.
Then again, it's cleanly. Like it's
Right.
clean
It's
to do
for,
that.
yeah, it's for cleanliness. But, some of those differences, if someone's not open to learning about,
Yeah.
something new, and they're not open to your culture, then it makes it really hard to develop a friendship, like a deep friendship with them. So that's what it was like growing up as a kid and like going to school. And I know that I've been like talking a lot, so I want to hear from Jasmine's experiences too. So yeah, you can go ahead with your
Okay.
story.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with your examples, and I agree. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about competition and pressures. So, we grew up in neighborhoods north of Seattle where the biggest racial groups were white, Asian, and Hispanic Latino. And I can only count two friends and classmates during my K through 12 schooling who were Khmer American like me. And when I was younger, I did have mostly Asian friends, but they were East Asian, not Southeast Asian. So while we did have similarities, there were also many differences. So just like Mellissa, there were some subjects, mostly math and science, where I wasn't very fast at. And within my peer group, they would compare grades and test scores. And that was just in elementary school. And I always felt that I was so slow with understanding math and science. So whenever they compared test scores right away, I would feel really anxious. And there's the stereotypes about Asians that we're good at math and science in school as a whole, and that we aspire to have high status jobs like being a doctor, engineer, lawyer. And I never really resonated with that, and it was a lot of pressure. So we hear a lot about the model minority myth, but I felt like I wasn't that. And that made me question, am I smart enough? Am I going to have a good career if I'm not good at this? So it raised a lot of questions for me too. And I am actually going to share an experience that I haven't shared with anybody before, like with even Matt. But
Aww.
so like there used to be a standardized test in Washington called the WASL. And I remember one year I actually failed the science section. And when it came in the mail, well, I was worried if Matt would see it and what she would say.
Yeah.
And our parents weren't that strict. Like they wanted us to do well in school. But they weren't like tiger parents, like that stereotypical thinking that an A is not enough.
Well,
well,
because you're the baby.
Yeah, because I was a baby, so they weren't as much.
I think they were really strict with me. And then
okay.
she's our middle sister. Then they were strict with her too, but she also has like some learning disabilities.
Yeah.
And that's when they started to be not as strict. You
Yeah,
know?
that makes sense.
I think that's
and
what
then
happened.
When I was born, they started working more, so they weren't around that much. So I failed the science section, and I didn't want Matt to know. So I actually took that mail and I hid it somewhere. Yeah, so she never figured out. So Matt, if you watch this,
I don't even know this story.
Yeah, but after that, I was so ashamed because I don't know why this school did this, but they took a picture of all of the kids with shirts that said like, "I passed the WASL," and what about the kids that didn't pass? How would that make them feel? Because it was during lunch and they asked all the kids to wear it. Maybe it was for some grant, but I just remember feeling so ashamed. And as a teacher now, I'm like, that's just a test score. That doesn't say how good of a student you are. That's just, that just tells you what good of a test taker you are, right? So after that, I passed everything. Like I remember that the next years I tried to check my answers more, so I wouldn't be in that situation again. But I just wanted to give that example because growing up, I just felt a lot of pressure to be perfect.
Right.
And to not get in trouble, to make sure that our families didn't have to worry about us. So
I wasn't a great test taker either. And I remember the pressure that they put on us students to pass the WASL, which is, the state
and
test.
Now it's HISP, high school proficiency exam.
Right.
So it's same thing, but different name, probably. So I want to also say that in middle school and high school, I found my community on the internet, actually. So I looked up to Asian American influencers and artists on YouTube because these were role models that were building their own community in the internet space. So you might know AJ Raphael, Gabe Bondoc, Kathy Nguyen, Kina Granis, JR Aquino, Quest Crew.
Wow,
like all of those people during that time, like 2009, they were very prevalent on the Asian American community on YouTube. And if traditional media didn't represent Asians, we made our own communities through YouTube. So I liked looking up to these people because they proved that Asians can pursue music, art, dance, unconventional routes to have successful careers. And that kind of opened doors for me to realize that you should pursue anything that you love and set your mind to, and you should just pursue your passions, things that make you happy. So thank you to all of the influencers that I grew up with, because it let me have people to let me see what was out there in the world. And I know I'm talking long too, but I'm proud of my culture, considering how much our family has gone through. We talk a lot about that on our podcast. And whenever I heard people growing up mentioning Cambodia, I would be like, yeah, I'm Cambodian too. I know a lot about that.
It makes you so proud.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And while living in America, I think it's beautiful that we're keeping our cultures alive through our traditions, food, language, values of family and life, and all of that. So,
right. Our next question is, what is one personal experience that comes to mind when thinking about racism? And I can go first. When I first experienced racism, this was right after high school. I was very fortunate enough to land an internship opportunity with a Fortune 500 company. And this was in the Midwest, and I am from the West Coast. And so if you can imagine, this is what was my first time just being exposed to living in a different state, let alone a smaller city. And so I remembered there were cornfields everywhere, and I could not find an Asian grocery store. So that meant there was not a lot of Asians around. So it's predominantly white. And I got along with a few interns, but the interns that I got along with were also outsiders. And, you know, they were different. They were people of color. And so I just remembered not being included in social gatherings, and I didn't know the reason why. And so, you know, there was a group of interns that like always made plans and went out, and I remembered asking, you know, why am I not invited? And I found out the real reason later on was that it was because I was Asian. And I just remembered feeling hurt, but also feeling shocked, because that had never happened to me before. And coming from the Seattle area, like our population is so diverse.
yeah.
Like there's so many people who look different, right? And I just can't believe that racism still existed. And maybe it was because I was kind of stuck in my bubble, you know, on the West Coast and not ever running into these issues before. But that really opened my eyes. Like that experience
I couldn't believe that when you told me.
Yeah. So then I spent the rest of my internship being by myself, because all the other interns, when their assignment was over, they went back home, but I wanted to stay a little bit longer. Like I stayed another month longer before fall quarter started in college. Yeah. And I just hung out by myself. I had no friends. That was how the rest of my internship went. But I did a lot of exploring on my own. So did solo traveling. Yeah. So this experience did scar me. It's not the worst thing, you know, to ever happen to me, but it taught me that I needed to empathize more with like the marginalized communities and to understand people, who they are, why they act, you know, in certain ways and why, and, you know, what's the history behind it. So it really made me reflect a lot on how other people were living in the US. So yep, that was my experience at like 18 years old.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I can't believe they said that, but at least they were honest so you can know, but still, it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially like being born in the United States, you're like, okay, I am one of you, you know?
Yeah.
And just like you, like,
yeah,
I can speak English, like some of the things that you like, you know, we can
you know,
find
you're not hanging out with me
just because I look different, you know? Like I just, I was so
that's
shocked.
Weird. And yeah, they're adults basically, so I don't know why they said that, but yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. For me, I'll also share a microaggression, and we do recognize that there are our Black and brown friends and neighbors that experience more severe cases of racism. But I also think the microaggressions are painful as well, especially when we experience them like multiple ones in a day, or like they stick with you, these moments that we're talking about.
Right.
So one that comes to mind is when I was studying abroad in Italy, that was the first time I traveled without my family, let alone traveling outside of the country, besides Canada. And I didn't bring my personal phone with me. So I just had my laptop. Melissa said I shouldn't have brought my
I don't know why I gave you that advice.
Well, I didn't have my phone with me. I just had the Italian phone that just had my instructor's number. Yeah, so...
You know why? Because roaming charges were extremely expensive back then.
Oh, but Wi-Fi was everywhere, though. I could have brought it. I would have taken more pictures. That's okay. But there were a ton, and you can remember this too, because you traveled to Italy, but there are a ton of Asian tourists there on a daily basis. And one time I was taking a walk by myself around the piazza, minding on my own business. And then a local person or shop owner was walking towards me and smiled. So I smiled back because I was by myself. I didn't make lasting friends on my study abroad trip like you might think. So yeah, I was by myself, kind of sad, just by myself. And he came down to my level and said, "Ni hao." And he smiled and walked away. And I smiled back, but I also felt humiliated and offended. And while it was a nice gesture, it was annoying that he assumed that just because I looked Asian, I must be Chinese. And I think that is due to all of the tourists around. But after that, my mood was really soured, even though I was trying to have a nice time being by myself. And I already stuck out in Italy by being dark-skinned. And without having friends there and family there, it was just a lot. And then when that happened, I was like, okay, like maybe I should just not have a good day today. So I didn't know at that time that was a microaggression. So while people may mean well, they should be more conscious about how they treat other people, because it can make a big impact on how we view ourselves. So that's one moment that sticks out. Other instances of racism have been watching things happen to my family or classmates, but I think that was one of the lasting ones that I remember growing up.
I feel like that happens often, especially traveling to different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
They just automatically assume that you're from this country or that you speak this language, just based on how you look. Or they're just really curious, like, where are you from?
Yeah.
And even if you say you're from the US, they're like, but where are you really from?
Mm-hmm.
Where are your parents from?
Yeah.
I think people are just like really curious,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great example of a microaggression.
Mm-hmm.
And I just
not
cannot
great
believe.
Experiencing it,
I know it's not a great experience, but
a great example of what it is. Yeah.
I'm really just shocked that you traveled alone in a different country. And you were so young.
19?
Mm-hmm.
19? I think 19 or 20.
You're so brave.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that was a good experience for me. But other than that, strangers are usually friendly. Like the people that I met on the train, they saw that I was traveling alone, so they would be lend an extra hand. So that was just one person, and he was trying to be nice, but we have to make sure to be careful, right, when we address people. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. All right, next question is, and sorry, this is live, so sorry about my, I didn't get choked up about this, but maybe I was thinking a lot in my brain and it just came out like, well.
Yeah.
Okay, question 3. What does our identities mean to us? And Melissa, we'll go first.
Okay. Wait, you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I talked a lot, so.
Yeah, for those who don't know who we are, and if the name is not apparent, I identify as a Cambodian American female from the West Coast. And yeah, it took a long time for me to figure out who I am and be confident in myself. Because for a long time, I wasn't comfortable using my voice. I was very shy and was not confident in speaking up. And it really does take time to find yourself and learn more about who you are. And through experiences and over time, like you just start to really appreciate yourself and your family's history and like all the imperfections. Because
Yeah.
you know, with our family story, you know, you know, it hasn't been perfect. It's been tough. We've had challenges along the way. And I just remembered just feeling ashamed, you know, at those differences. Because when I looked at other families and like how they always went on family trips, like I always felt like a tinge of jealousy, you know, and I envied them.
Me too. Yeah. Because they were close.
Yeah.
And spent a lot of time together.
Right. But I think that now that we're in our 20s and 30s, our family is stronger than ever.
Yeah, I think so too.
Early on, I think those were the toughest moments, but we got through them. And now I think we're in a good place.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think our Asian culture is so unique from others in that we show our love through acts of service.
Yeah.
Like our parents always making it a priority to have like a roof over our head, just a warm environment, and that we always had food to eat, that we never went
eat our vitamins.
You know, ate our vitamins, that we didn't go hungry, that we had the essentials so that we could study hard in school and be financially stable. And so I am proud to come from two different cultures, although I do feel like I resonate more with the American culture just because, you know, we live here in the US. And I do feel more Americanized. And that's okay. Like, that's perfectly fine. I feel like our identity is so fluid. Like, I can be, you know, the person I am today, and I could change in 2 days, right? I could change in a month or a couple of months down the road. I feel like we're always evolving, and that's perfectly fine. And it isn't until now, I'm in my early 30s, that I've learned to love myself and all my imperfections. And, you know, through my unique experiences, it has really shaped my identity. Love to hear from you, Jasmine.
Yeah, that's a good place to be at your age, in your stage of life. So, yay, confidence. I wish sometimes we could speak to our younger selves. That would be so interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
But definitely, I was not confident at all
Me
when
neither.
I was like 20.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Very insecure.
Yeah. So for me, I am also a Cambodian American. We're sisters. So. And I think I felt so much shame growing up for not speaking our language by elders and even just with my friends, because my Asian friends, Vietnamese friends, would call their parents and they would speak in Vietnamese. But then for me, whenever I called my mom back, I would speak back in English and she would speak in Khmer. So I always felt ashamed for not speaking Khmer. And it got worse over the years because the more I was in school, the more I used English, the more I got better at that and not with Khmer. So I think during these recent years, I've given myself more grace because I can't blame myself or my parents for how the language learning went, like as I was growing up. Like I remember Matt had us go to Khmer school, but that didn't work out because it wasn't the same level as I was. And the Khmer kids kind of made us feel bad for not knowing the alphabet. Yeah, it was me and Jessica, our middle sister.
I dodged Khmer school.
So then we had our aunties teach us, but then school came in the way of going on the weekends, and I just couldn't keep up. And then we also, again, like I mentioned earlier, we had a lack of Khmer people around us where we were living. Like our family used to go to the temple, but when I was born, my family started to work more. So then on the weekends, it was more like relaxing and not really going out much. So starting with this 2khmericansisters podcast project in Instagram, I feel like I've been becoming more accepting with my identity as Khmer and American. And I now can tell myself, like, it's okay not to be fluent yet, as long as I try to learn Khmer again. Someday I do want to be fluent, or at least conversational, fluent. And then as long as I try to speak with my elders, with our grandma. And I think effort and appreciation is what should matter most. And it's okay to not be perfect because, like you said, we grew up in America, and it's a given that we're going to lose a little bit of ourselves, which is sad, but we're trying to hold on to it still. And I have a lot of intersectionalities with being young, female, people of color, educator. I'm a POC educator of color. And I feel like all of these identities encompass strength. So I never thought I could be a leader when I was young because of my personality and my mannerisms. And like Melissa shared, I'm still building my voice. And I truly believe that all of us POCs have to fake it till you make it. So all of us who are Black and brown in America have to just fill in our roles and gain that respect and trust from people. And people can look down on me and take advantage of my niceness. And I'm someone that agrees a lot because I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to challenge like what has already been. But I'm realizing to speak up for myself in my professional and personal relationships for what I want and need. And I'm learning every single day. It's okay to have conflict and disagreements with people like you, even you. It's just like hard because growing up, you
Super
just
hard.
want to hide and like not cause anything.
Well,
and maybe that has to do with like our Khmer parents growing up during the genocide. But I just feel like it's been a lot of learning every year. And I feel like I'm also in a better place now with my confidence too.
I feel like that is really common in Asian culture where we're taught to respect our elders, to not talk back, to not be opinionated, but that in effect makes us seen as reserved and like keeping our head down, not ruffling any feathers. And those are not traits that are celebrated in the professional world, in academics.
Yeah.
So I like what you said about how that you're learning to, you know, speak your truths and to have healthy disagreements with others.
Yeah, but it's hard. It feels uncomfortable.
It is.
Yeah, to try to, like, you are you. So when you try to be something else, it clashes with who you are. So
yeah, that's something that my boss told me recently too. She said, you know, she gave me a performance review and said, you know, I did well on everything else, but one thing she wanted me to work on was to disagree with others. And because I always say yes and try to keep the peace and harmony within teams. But she told me to ask questions, be curious, speak up, and those are really hard to do. But you have to just keep trying, right? Like you said, fake it till you make it.
And that kind of leads to the next question for our younger listeners or just anybody around the world. So what is our advice for our Asian and Pacific Islander communities around the world?
Alrighty. So the advice that I'd like to give to our API community around the world is that I think it's incredible how much we can accomplish together. And I love that our communities are coming together and sharing our talents with one another. Just like this digital festival is amazing. The people that we're able to network with and connect. And I just love this era where there's just a wealth of information out there. And my advice for our API communities is to keep collaborating, to give back and put ourselves out there to increase BIPOC representation in all industries. And, you know, if we do that, we'll be stronger together and better together.
For my advice, it would be learning more about our own cultures and histories and figuring out how can we pass these down onto our future generations so it doesn't get lost within our families. And I think that's a struggle for us. And now that we are finished with school and we're focusing on our personal, professional lives, I think it's a good time to get back into our roots. So learning our language, our cultures, traditions, so that we can make sure that it doesn't get lost. And also, I want us all to think about how can we live a life where we're giving back to others in some way, including our people of color communities. So our families have gone through so much, so many hardships and sacrifices to get us where we are today. And we wouldn't have these opportunities, or we need to seek them if there aren't any. I find that for my work as a teacher, I'm able to do this, to give back on a daily basis. So I work with my students, families, staff, community members. But what is that one thing or few things that you can do to give back? So, and I've been thinking a lot about life lately and existential crisis, I guess.
Oh no!
With this pandemic, and maybe it's just with growing older, but my big question is, what impacts do you want to make in the world before your time is up? So if you were gone tomorrow, what would you want to leave behind? And I think that's really made me think about the interactions that I have with people, the choices that I make, the career that I'm pursuing, my work-life balance, right? Because life isn't just work. So I'm just wondering, for all of our viewers right now, what do you want to leave behind? What mark do you want to make in the world? Because we all can do something. I know the world has so many problems, but focus on maybe a couple things, and that will mean the best for the next generations, you know? Like we all have to contribute something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. What will be your legacy? What
Yeah,
will be the
that's
legacy
right.
that you leave
Yeah.
behind?
Yeah.
That's a deep question. I don't
Very
even
deep.
know. I haven't even answered that myself. So looks like I have some homework to do.
With that.
All right. So with that, we've come to the end of this episode.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for joining us today, and also to BaylenFM for inviting us to be a part of this exciting digital festival experience. And we hope that you were able to take away at least one meaningful thing from our talk today. And perhaps you related to some of the stories that we shared. And if so, we'd love to hear from you. Be sure to leave us a comment or a direct message on our Instagram at 2khmericansisters, or you can even comment on BaylenFM's Instagram.
Or this video. Yeah. So if you want to hear more from us, be sure to follow our podcast at the 2khmericansisters. That's spelled KHMERICAN. It combines Khmer and American. So we're the 2khmericansisters podcast on services like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And there will be many other amazing speakers to follow up with BaylenFM's event. And they are on all major social media platforms. So we want to thank you so much for listening to our mini-series interview. And yeah, take care.
Bye.
Thank you.